You weren't at the Cabinet Committee, you're not a member of that committee, but what are you being told about the atmosphere, first of all?
Well, what I've been able to glean, but as you say, I wasn't there, is that it was a very positive discussion. And I think we have made good progress. And I think the central understanding, and you have divergent views on a big issue like Brexit, as you would expect, but the central common understanding is that there will be areas and sectors of industry where we agree to align our regulations with European regulations. The automotive industry is perhaps an obvious example because of supply chains that are integrated, but it will be on a voluntary basis, and we will, as a sovereign power, have the right to choose to diverge. And what we won't be doing is accepting changes in rules because the EU unilaterally chooses to make those changes.
But in that case, there won't be divergence, because if they change, then we won't change with them.
Well, there can be divergence, but as you see in trade deals all over the world, you just have an independent arbitration system where there's a disagreement that sorts out these problems.
And that's very important, isn't it? Because what a red line for a lot of people is the European Court of Justice, which oversees some of these arrangements. For instance, European Medicines Agency, you know very well. Do you think that the government is now moving to allowing other bodies to be either set up or used that would effectively take the place of the ECJ and have that oversight role?
Well, that's what happens when you have any trade deal, a trade deal between Canada and the United States. You have to have an independent arbitration mechanism. But as a sovereign country, we're going to take back control of our laws. And I think the key point here, which has been missed, is that it's perfectly possible to have frictionless trade without being in a customs union. You just go about it in a different way as an agreement between two sovereign bodies. And that's what we've always said we want. We don't want barriers in trade between Britain and the EU. It'd be bad for both sides.
But the point that lawyers make about that, and we've heard that on this programme over and over again, the point that lawyers make is it is a terribly important detail. It is a detail and it's complex, but it's terribly important. And it is this, that under World Trade Organization rules, actually, you can't do that. You can have a trade arrangement between two countries, and then that's fine. But if you're outside any kind of trade relationship, then you must charge whatever the tariffs are that the WTO insist on. In other words, you must have checks on borders. And that is what we would have if we're not part of a customs union.
Well, my understanding is that it is perfectly possible to have frictionless trade, and those checks, for example, can be done electronically or using technology and so on.
Yeah, but that's a different argument, isn't it? But you're saying that there would still be checks, wouldn't it?
It's not, because what you want with frictionless trade is to have a supply chain that could span, Britain, Italy, Switzerland, Germany for automotive parts, for example, and it's entirely possible to do that using technology. And it's that lack of friction in the relationship that's so important to businesses, and we think it's entirely possible to get that.
And does that
but
flexibility,
not being subject to the European Court of Justice?
Does that flexibility that you're suggesting that was on offer yesterday at the Cabinet Subcommittee meeting, that sense of deals being done with individual sectors, does that amount then? Does that go as far as at least the possibility of a customs union? Because the government has ruled that out, having previously talked about it. Labour is now talking about it. Anna Soubry, your parliamentary colleague, is going to table an amendment, she said last night, to the next bill, the trade bill, in which she is going to suggest that we remain part of a customs union. It is possible, if Labour support that, the government could be defeated. Is there any sense that you're getting that the government might be willing to think again about that?
No, because if we were part of the customs union, we wouldn't be able to negotiate trade deals independently with other countries, and we wouldn't have full sovereign control of our destiny as a nation. But what we want is frictionless trade, and we want to find a different way. Customs union is one way of getting frictionless trade, but it's not the only way. Right. And what we're saying is that we want to achieve frictionless trade, but by agreement between two sovereign bodies, the United Kingdom and the European Union.
Right. So there's no possibility of the government coming round to the idea of a customs union?
No.
The other thing that actually has a big relevance for the area of your responsibility, the business of who comes from the European Union and stays and works here, the understanding now that those who come during the transition can stay for as long as they want to into the long-term future. From the NHS's point of view, that presumably, if that is the agreement, would be a good thing.
Well, I need to wait until the Cabinet meeting on Tuesday to be briefed on what was discussed.
But would you welcome
matter.
it if that were to be the case?
What I would say is that we are going to have an independent immigration system, and every country in the world that has an independent immigration system prioritises the need of the health and social care sectors. They are absolutely critical, and I'm totally confident going forward that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary will really listen hard to any health secretary who makes an argument for the need to bring in people either from the EU or from anywhere in the world. But in the end, it's not sustainable to do that.
But is that an argument you're willing to make about the transition period? Because it sounds to me as if you are.
Well, I think as far as the next few years are concerned, we're going to be very pragmatic and sensible, and that's always been the government's position. But what's not sustainable, I think, is not to train enough of our own people to fulfil these roles in the longer term, because we're not the only country with an ageing population. You've got India and China who are massively expanding their clinical workforces. And so in the end, the failure that we've had in this country for far too long is that we haven't trained enough of our own, and that's what we're putting right.